I just first wanted to thank you again for speaking with me on behalf of KGL Editorial about peer review. If you could just please give me your name, title, and the organization you represent so we have it documented.
Sure. It's nice to talk to you, Mary. My name's Jeremy Chapman. I'm the editor-in-chief of the journal Transplantation Direct, and that is a journal of the Transplantation Society, based globally.
Thank you for that. So the reason your name came to the top of my list was we were speaking about your extensive, active editorial board. And that's what I really want to focus on, because this is about peer review, and your editorial board is unique in the peer review process than other journals, as you are well aware. And I just wanted to see if you could tell me more about the peer review process at your journals, and especially about that editorial board that you utilize.
Yeah, so if you start with the principles of what you're trying to achieve with peer review, in the field of transplantation, the application of expertise to every submission that comes to us is complicated because the expertise is so diverse in our particular field. So transplantation, I could receive, I had 13 papers in this morning, and they ranged from a comprehensive meta-analysis that a renal physician would understand, but which needs meta-analytic methodological understanding, through to a couple of papers that needed surgeons. One needed a cardiac surgeon and one needed a renal surgeon. Mm-hmm. And so one person can't handle that diversity of expertise. So how do I apply expertise accurately to every paper that comes our way? And the second comment is, how do I make it quick? It's got to be expert and it's got to be quick. And that means getting to peer reviewers and editors who actually understand the particular topic. I mean, we all know if you're reading something you're very familiar with, you can review it very quickly. It just takes one read, a few notes, overview, and you can make a judgment quite quickly. If you don't know the subject, it's impossible. And that's why most peer reviewers' requests get rejected. So what we've done is we have an associate editor for everything. So we've got just under 100 associates. They would handle 3 papers at any one time. And since they take about a month each to handle from go to woe, they would have, maybe one a week or one a fortnight to look at. And I assign them those papers. So I know all of them and I know their expertise. Sometimes I make a mistake and I'll come back to that. And so I can assign to them something that they know about, something that they have expertise about, and also something that they have a diaspora of reviewers that they can call on because they know that particular field. So it becomes a relatively straightforward job unless I'm outside their field of expertise. And occasionally I make a mistake, and I've got a very open mechanism for an associate editor to come back and say, nah, not this one. No, thank you. Please reassign. And I reassign them always. So expertise applied quickly. So I get to see every paper on the way into the journal. They're applied usually within 6 hours of being assigned to me. Then the associate editors take between a few hours and a few days to assign them to peer reviewers. Once a peer reviewer has accepted, we've got an average of 11.5 days at the moment before we get the response. So, and that again comes back to my point. If you give somebody something that they know about, that's in their field that they're interested in, it's a simple matter. They're interested to read it. They want to read it.
Mm-hmm.
And you get your response back reasonably quickly. We did fiddle around a little bit with the time to reminders, and settled on 7 days and 10 days. And that's why we get them all back at 11 days, because we give them a 10-day reminder and they go, oops. So
do you send one also prior to, do you ever send them for the invitations or no?
Yeah, we send them the invitation. Then yes, and then they get a second opportunity, and then they get dropped at 48 hours, 72 hours. The associate editors always respond. It's very uncommon. We keep a list, of course, of when people are out of office, and anybody can nominate any period that they're out of office. I also have at least 2 for every field of expertise, for conflict of interest reasons and for absence reasons. You need a backup. And of course, the other thing is, if you know the field well enough, you actually know the conflict of interest well enough before you assign. So it is about knowing everybody. So what are the advantages of having a large editorial team? Expertise, I've just talked about. Geographical dispersion. There is an associate editor for our journal everywhere. Everywhere that there is good science and good clinical practice in transplantation, there's an associate editor. So we have a representative, if you like, out there in the environment. So they're people that any author can talk to. Give them a ring. So is this something that transplantation would like? Or the other way around? Have you thought about giving that to transplantation? I'm sure we'd be interested in it. So that is an ambassadorial role for associate editors.
Yeah,
And
that's a really good point.
It really helped reinforce the journal's global nature. It also means that, if I get a particularly, should we say, politically sensitive topic in the US, then I don't give it to somebody in the US to handle. I give it to somebody in Europe or Asia to handle, so that we can manage those tensions. The next thing that we've concentrated on is the gender balance in the associate editors. So there's geography, expertise, and gender. And I think we're currently about 45% female. And I'm about to send out a few more invitations to join the associate editor board, and that will take us to 50, which is my goal. So gender diversity, geographical diversity, and expertise diversity. So once the associate editor has handled it, the problem we've got is that they're only handling a relatively small number of papers, and they don't have the balance as to how good a paper is compared with everything else we've got coming through. So I have a chain of editors. We have an associate editor, then a deputy editor, then an executive editor who covers the particular field, so clinical transplantation, basic science, liver, and then myself as the executive editor, and I send out all letters. And I send out all letters to make sure that our tone and our principles for decision-making letters is constant. The tone is polite, advisory, and I make sure that every letter that goes out it's clear that a large number of people have looked at the paper. And I also make sure that people who read the letter understand why the decision's been taken. So peer review, for my view, is about trying to make the best of a paper. This is what you need to do to make this paper the best paper it can be. The editorial chain's job is to say, if it were the best paper it could be, Where does it rate in terms of our priority for publication? Now, a lot of people would say, you've got 4 levels of editor making a decision. Well, yeah, okay. I'd respond with a couple of comments. Firstly, yes, it is a lot. Secondly, we get it done in about 3 to 4 days. Turnaround's not too bad then. And thirdly, redundancy. We can lose somebody in that chain. We can even lose 2 people in that chain. And we've still got the principle of expertise applied to the decision-making on the paper. So it allows us to stay at 24-hour, 7-day-a-week business to turn everything around quickly. And then each editorial level sees a different scope of the work, and they can adjudicate it against the other material that they see. When you get to the executive editors, we have a dashboard that we monitor. We know what our decision rates are like compared with what we need and compared with the other components of the journal. And it is in the end my job to make sure that we are balancing the quality between the sections of the executive editors. So I will defend the complexity by saying it works, and it builds redundancy and it builds expertise into a very diverse field. Now, if your journal is not so diverse, then you probably don't need it. But I can tell you that I cannot give a complex search on cardiac transplantation to a renal physician. And there's very little point giving a complex renal meta-analysis to a cardiac surgeon. You don't get what you need. And so that's the main issue for us, the diversity of incoming material.
The decision was made to make this transition, I think, on the editorial level by yourself, and just the operationalizing that, right? Because there's many journals that are being encouraged to develop a broader global focus and to also, watch the balance of their editorial boards. And you seem to have created this very intentionally. And I just wonder if you could talk about the early stages of that.
Yeah. So Transplantation as a journal was founded in 1966. And it was founded under the ownership of the publisher. The editorial team that ran it moved slowly, evolved slowly between the leadership of the society, the Transplantation Society, over those 30 odd years, the next 30 years, 66 through to 2006, really, 40 years. That was fit for purpose when the field was quite small and focused. What happened through the 90s and 2000s was that the field broadened substantially, both globally and scientifically, and in terms of the organs transplanted. And so as we came through the 2000s, the other major influence was the pharma had developed the drugs needed for transplantation, immunosuppressive drugs, to the point where it was almost impossible to run a clinical trial to show benefit for a new immunosuppressant. So we hit a brick wall in terms of new development of immune suppression in transplantation. That meant that the pharmaceutical industry disappeared in terms of advertising, and it meant that most of the clinical trials disappeared. because you didn't need any more, because we did them all through the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah.
So as we came through to the end of 2010, the journal was really changing. At least the environment was changing. The other thing that had happened was the American Society of Transplantation had created the American Journal of Transplantation and had been very aggressive and very successful in building a really good journal and a very strong competitor. And I don't think that our journal responded to that pressure properly during the 2000s. And so by 2010, it was an inferior journal that had run out of steam from its history. We were still the most cited journal. You know, we get about 25,000 cites a year. It had an impact factor of 3.6, 3.8, but it was losing steam, and it had lost finances because it had lost the advertising income, which made the publisher focus on it, and it made the society focus on it. And then I came in as a change agent in 2014, starting in 2014 with the 2015 issues, my first issues. So I came in with a remit to change, and we did. And I did change it overnight. I had a 3-month lead up. I appointed the associate editor team, the executive editor team, the deputy editor team, and they've mostly stayed the same since then. Not the associate editors, but the more senior editors have mostly stayed the course since then. We've added a little and changed a little here and there, but it's 85% the same. The associate editor team since then is probably about 50 to 60% the same. And we changed. The other thing that happened was we changed from Scholar One to Editorial Manager. So we had to rebuild the whole system anyway. And so we rebuilt it anew. And the final thing that happened was we created a sibling journal, open access, online only, which was an issue in those days, journal called Transplantation Direct, with a feed from the parents' journal, if you like, a sibling journal, Transplantation. And so we created a mirror image journal at the same time in Editorial Manager. So we created 2 images of the journal and ran the 2 together. And it's been successful. Transplantation Direct has received its impact factor this year. It's 2.3. It's about where I would have expected it to be. 6 new journals came in this year and into the transplantation group in Clarivate's transplantation grouping, and Transplantation Direct was substantially higher than the other new journals. It was also substantially higher than a number of the, shall I say, more traditional journals, many of which had already transitioned to open access only. So I'm very pleased with that. The success of creating a sibling journal was helped in 2 ways. Firstly, it meant that we could be a little bit more tight on what we accepted into the main journal, because the top 10% was what we wanted in the journal, but the next 10% was what the authors expected to publish in the journal. So I needed to provide them with an alternative place to publish, which was Transplantation Direct. And about half of them took up that offer in the early days. Now it's pretty much 90% taking up the offer for transfer.
Yeah, the impact factor, I'm sure, helps.
Yeah, absolutely. But the other factor in there is, of course, that we recycle the reviewers. So the review of the paper in transplantation, that review goes into the decision letter for the transfer. The editor of Transplantation Direct, Ed Geisler, one of my executive editors, he then determines what he actually needs from that decision letter for the paper to be acceptable in Transplantation Direct, and then the authors put a revision into Transplantation Direct, and it can either be seen by new reviewers or by the same reviewers.
But I just wondered if there were any challenges with the peer review that you've experienced.
Yeah, of course, everybody's got challenges with peer review.
All right,
so
the number one.
The number one challenge with peer review is a poor paper. Nobody wants to read it. You can see from the title it's a poor paper. You know it's a poor paper. You don't need to read the blasted thing. Why should I spend 20 minutes reading the blasted thing when I know it's a lousy paper? So what we did with that was, the associate editor knows that. I know it when I see the paper. I've probably assigned two out of the 13 today that are going to come straight back at me. That's fine. We have reject without external review, so that the associate editor looks at the paper. I hope they read the full paper. They certainly evaluate the paper, and I ask them to give me a paragraph on why this paper is not going to be published in the journal. And so this is the bottom 20% of papers. Get them out of the way. Don't waste people's time with them. The associate editor has a win because they don't have to assign them to peer reviewers, and they don't, they know it's rubbish. It's going to be rubbish. They're not going to recommend publication or revision. Let's get it off the desk. So I think that's a really important process. Now, how often does somebody reject without review when I don't want them to, for a variety of reasons? And the answer to that is very seldom. 1% maybe. And then I simply go back and I say, well, for the following reasons, I really think we need peer review on this. So reject without review. I remind you, I've still got 4 sets of eyes on that paper.
Yeah,
there's 4 editors are going to review that. This is not cursory, desk flip type. And I make sure that there's always at least 2 of the editors of comments have gone into the decision letter. And again, this is about providing, that poor medical student somewhere, or the researcher in a third world hospital, the respect that their work is due. We have looked at it, but it isn't up to transplantation standards, and this is why. So that's the first issue I would raise about not wasting peer reviewers' time. Do I offer peer review as an incentive? The answer is no. There are no incentives to being a peer reviewer other than being a peer reviewer. And the key there is to see material in your field that you're interested in before everybody else sees it.
Yep, that's an incentive.
And to be able to say, I work for transplantation. So while, an impact factor of 6.2 at the moment is not spectacular in the publishing field, it is one of the top 3 journals in our field. AJT 8, Journal of Heart Lung Transplantation, and us. And so you're working for the premier international journal, and that is worth having on your curriculum vitae. It's also a training ground for authors. If you haven't peer-reviewed papers, you're not going to be a good author. And people know that. Once you've peer-reviewed other people's work and analysed that work, you really understand that there are certain features that you haven't put into your paper that you expect to be there. And so you're a better author. So my argument for peer reviewers is, if you want to be a better author, do the peer review. I
just wanted to share the theme of Peer Review Week is peer review in the future of publishing. What does the future look like for your peer review program?
Yeah, isn't that interesting? So I've thought about a world with no peer review, and I've decided, what would it be like if we simply published everything that was submitted to us? Firstly, plagiarism is real. Fraud is real. You have to be very sensitive and methodical to pick it up. A reader who doesn't have the electronic mechanisms, tools that we have to detect plagiarism and fraud isn't going to pick them up. So then there's a lot of fraud that's going to get through. And once some fraud gets through, lots will get through. So That's the first problem with no peer review. The second problem is papers, and I've just seen one. A paper comes because the author's got a particular perspective that they're writing the paper from, but the reader is coming from a different perspective. And so unless somebody puts that to the author, they don't go, oh, yeah, I guess that's right. And so you modify the paper through peer review to make it better for the reader and more comprehensive for the reader. That's the second thing. And the third thing, I think, is because you put the overlay of method into the process of writing and publishing a paper. And by putting that method in, people get used to the extracting information from papers in a way that's useful to them.
Yep.
The other comment I'd make is, during COVID, I put an expedited review system in. And I think we all have to think about how we do expedited review and what we do. Nobody knew anything about COVID. Nobody knew anything about COVID in the immunosuppressed patient. We didn't know in the field what to do with patients. We didn't know whether to stop transplanting, continue transplanting. Did it matter if the recipient had COVID? Yes. Did it matter if the donor had COVID? Yes, but only in certain circumstances. Did vaccination work? Don't know. We didn't know any of that. So we developed speed of review. And I turned around COVID papers with 3 expert reviewers in 24 to 36 hours. Because I wasn't prepared to sit on information that I had that nobody else had.
Right.
It needed to be out there really quickly. Now, I really dislike the preprint service. I think they mess up a lot of our assessments. I know they're very popular, and I know there's an increasing number of papers going out there on preprint service. But I think we need to be better in the publishing field to ensure that we've got a speed of turnaround. Somebody came to me and said, I've had this paper with a journal for a year without a decision. Is that fair? And I went, you serious? A year? How could you sit on a paper for a year? We have a system where if a paper's been with us for 6 weeks, it comes to me. I get to evaluate where we're going, what we're going to do with it, how we're going to get that out the door. I don't want a decision waiting longer than 6 weeks. That's our absolute maximum. So I think we have to be speedier to make peer review relevant. But there are core issues in peer review which scientific publishing should not discard, because if we do, the quality of science will drop. And those journals that do discard it or short-circuit it will in time deteriorate. They won't be useful. And if they're not useful, nobody's going to read them. They may still get authors prepared to pay to publish in them, and that's the penalty of an open access system. You can still make a profit publishing rubbish.
Yes.
That's the core issue that journals, serious medical journals, serious scientific journals have to deal with and have to stay in touch with. And I think you have to be responsive to authors' needs. in a way that delayed decision making doesn't achieve.
Well, I think ending on a high note of rapid peer review, rigorous peer review, and really the sense of community that you've built is a great place to end. And I truly thank you for your time. If there's something you wanted to say about peer review that I missed, I'll give you one more chance. But I think we really covered a lot here tonight and today, and I again appreciate your time. But if you have any, nuggets of peer review wisdom that I missed or you missed.
No, I think you've covered the field.
Yeah, well, you're doing a great job,
survive.
and it's great. We're really looking forward to working with you.